Hello everybody, it's Fulham next at the Olympic. Kick-off on Saturday evening is 8 p.m, the game being on Sky Box Office for the princely sum of £14.95. Or you could donate the money to the food bank and watch whatever of the Brains Trust are working on Eyes Up Mother Brown on Saturday night. Let's face it, the pubs are shut, and even that lot would be a better option than having to watch Dancing for Idiots, or whatever that stupid programme that Matron insists passes for entertainment these days on a Saturday is. So, Fulham then. Well, it's not been the brightest of starts for Scott Parker's boys since their return to the top flight, though they did manage to escape the congested confines of the bottom three with a 2-0 win over West Brom, whose attempts to disguise themselves as Melchester Rovers fooled nobody on Monday night. The Cottagers' only other point this season came by way of a 1-1 draw up at Sheffield United. Otherwise, it's been red ink all the way, with home defeats to Arsenal and Villa, both 3-0, and Palace 2-1, and away at Leeds and Wolves 4-3 and 1-0 respectively. All of that has left them sitting above the trapdoor in 17th place with 4 points from the 7 played so far. Tellingly, the points gained so far have come from 2 of the 3 sides below them, which means they're probably looking forward to whenever it is they're likely to be playing Burnley. Their return to the top division came courtesy of their 2-1 defeat of neighbours Brentford at Wembley when they finally got round to playing the playoff final. As one might expect, the promotion prompted a venture into the transfer market, presumably in the hope of building a side that would be capable of preventing their traditional fairly prompt return, whence they came. However, if that were the case, some of the names arriving would appear to be, well, less than inspiring. Daisy, the socially distant personal assistant with a beautiful smile, tells me that no fewer than 7 permanent deals and 5 loan deals were signed during the window. The arrival of Anthony Knockaert from Brighton was an odd one. Knockaert had spent 2019-20 on loan from the Seagulls, with the deal being made permanent in July, when the player put pen to paper on a 3-year deal. Having paid something north of £10 million for the player, one might have expected Fulham to have been making plans to include him in the squad. Instead, with the player only having featured in the League Cup, he was dispatched off to Nottingham Forest on loan until the end of January. Bit odd that. We ourselves had been linked at one stage with right-back Anthony Robinson, who came in from Wigan for £2 million in the summer. As Wigan's finances collapsed at the end of last season, it appeared that pretty much any old offer would be accepted for just about anyone. The relatively low fee must have been, well, particularly galling for Wigan, who had earlier agreed a fee with Milan for about £10 million, only to see the deal collapse when the player failed a medical. In what may well have been one of those ill wind blowing good moments, a hitherto undiscovered irregular heartbeat was uncovered. Thankfully, following a spot of surgery, all was well, and the player was able to resume his career, with the downside of playing at Craven Cottage rather than the San Siro being put into some perspective by the possibility of a dreadful alternative. There were some more interesting arrivals in amongst the loan arrivals. Ademola Lookman was highly rated by many when Everton swooped to sign the player from Charlton for a reported fee of £7.5 million, rising to around £11 million with add-ons. He featured in 36 games for the Toffee men over a 2-year period, getting just the 1 goal in the process. His form didn't impress Everton's manager at the time, a certain S. Allardyce, and a deal to send the player out on loan to Derby was arranged. This didn't impress Lookman that much, and he soon set up an alternative, with RB Leipzig having expressed an interest. 5 goals in 11 appearances were enough to convince the fizzy drinks conglomerate to make the deal permanent. However, his 1920 season wasn't as impressive. Only 11 appearances in the league were made, and he pitched up just the other side of the river from his Wandsworth birthplace on a season-long loan during the window. They also picked up Ruben Loftus-Cheek on a year-long deal from the Chelsea loan stock. The player, known as Loftus-Cheat in these parts after a penalty he earned from an outside-the-box dive at Stamford Bridge a couple of years ago, spent much of 2018-19 on loan at Palace before an Achilles injury put him on ice for most of 1920. 2 other of their new arrivals are ruled out through injury. Netherlands international Kenny Tate, 13 Dutch caps for the traditionalists amongst us, has a torn calf muscle and he'll be missing, whilst Terence Congolo, who also has Dutch caps despite being born in the decidedly more mountainous environ of Switzerland, has a broken foot. Also missing will be Abdubakar Kamara, whose nasty stud raking of Palace's Eze earned him 3 matches off. Hey, let's move on to the wild and wacky world of association football. Manchester United gave their epilepsy-inducing change kit another run out against the Turkish team that isn't Fenerbahce, Galatasaray or Besiktas. The players of Istanbul Başakşehir stopped laughing enough to come away with a 2-1 victory in the so-called Champions League. To be fair to the Salford Moaners, if that kit was designed to have some sort of camouflage effect, it really worked. You couldn't see hide nor hair of a defender as our old chum Demba Ba raced away to score the opener for the Turkish champions. Interestingly, that club is owned by the Turkish Ministry of Youth and Sport, meaning that Manchester United were effectively beaten by a bunch of civil servants. Elsewhere, the anti-doping agency WADA has copped for a big compensation bill, having branded Mamadou Sakho a drug cheat for failing a test for a fat-burning drug that, it transpired, wasn't actually on UEFA's banned list at the time. Sakho was shifted away from his then club Liverpool faster than you could say diving cheat, leading to a loss of prestige and earnings. Though the way that club conducts its business, I say that getting shifted out of there would improve one's image and status no end. Which brings us neatly on to last weekend. Well, all the pressure and hypocrisy that Liverpool have been bringing to bear on PGMOL paid major dividends, didn't it? All this demanding of explanations every time they so much as lost the toss was bound to pay off eventually. Still, at least this old excuse trotted out over the past 30 years or so that if a Liverpool player is involved, it's sufficient for there to have been contact for a penalty or free kick to be awarded, seems to be finally getting the contempt it deserves. When the likes of both Souness and Murphy, both of whom in the past have been amongst the ranks of ex-Liverpool players constantly excusing their cheating ways, both bemoaned the fact that Salah dived, some sort of alarm bells ought to be ringing somewhere. Klopp, of course, denied that there'd been a dive at all, in a process known as lying through one's teeth. Talking of which, dodgy cosmetic dental work, the constant cheating and the inevitable crying to authority when things don't go his way all begs the question, have Donald Trump and Jurgen Klopp ever been seen in the same room together? It wasn't just the dive that annoyed, embarrassing though that was. Rice picked up a yellow card, deservedly so, for a foul that broke up a promising move. Fine, no problem with that. However, it would be nice if Kevin Friend was shown the 6 or 7 identical fouls perpetrated by the home side and forced to explain why similar sanction wasn't doled out on every other occasion. Note to PGMOL. Although the response Jurgen Klopp told me not to may be accurate, it is not an acceptable answer. All joking apart, if I can predict that there will be cheating at Anfield, and let's face it, it was hardly in the Nostradamus territory, was it? Then officials ought to be on the lookout to punish this sort of thing rather than colluding in it. And that includes you at the FA, who should be applying your own rules on retrospective punishment rather than deliberately flouting them. As a serial offender, Salah would be looking at 6 or 7 matches if the regulations were applied as written, rather than as Liverpool want them to be written. Meanwhile, the sooner that club disappears off to a Euro League where they can dive to their heart's content, without those of us who love the game that they are dumping all over having to endure it, then that would all be all for the better. For our part, there was much discussion about the contribution of Sebastian Haller to proceedings. Now, I said we'd have to adapt our style of play in the absence of Antonio, what with Haller being more of a target man than a runner of channels. But by God, man, it would really help were you to meet us halfway. There were a number of occasions when some sort of closing down wouldn't have got amiss. We're not talking scuttling dozens of yards across the back four. Just make things difficult for the guy on the ball 5 yards away, for Pete's sake. Antonio will continue to be absent. The murmurings at present suggest we're looking for a return at Sheffield United after the next international break. This means we'll go into this match with the same squad as last week. Post-match, Moyes was hinting at another start for Haller, who actually remains the club's leading scorer this season, even if his goals have been more a League Cup sort of thing. Maybe treating this match in the same way as the League Cup might be the way forward. Also missing last weekend was Mark Noble, who almost certainly wouldn't have made the starting 11 had he been fit, his absence from the bench being explained as a result of an unspecified knock, from which he's now recovered. I'd expect him to take his place on the racing car seats for this one. So, let's move on to the prediction. Well, I know they're arriving on the back of that win, but they'll have one eye on the fact that the only people from whom they've gained points are swirling around the bottom. Any confidence boost will be tempered by the knowledge that it took a spectacular amount of cheating by the so-called champions to beat us, and we're likely to prove a tougher nut to beat than Slavs Baggies, who have all sorts of internal politics going on up there in the Midlands. Whilst the absence of Antonio was missed against opposition of higher quality, Haller might be more in his element against the Cottagers, especially if he's stung by the criticism that came his way from pundits and supporters alike last weekend, as he really ought to be. So on the whole, I think we'll have far too much for them. The £2.50 then that I was going to place on a bet on the date that the result of the US presidential election will finally be announced will instead be delivered to Mr. Winston's Turf Accountancy Emporium as a wager on a home win. Let's make it 3-1 to us, shall we? Enjoy the game.